13 years. That's how long Eli hadn't stepped beyond the forest's edge. Ever since the town of Black Hollow was sealed off due to a biological incident, an event only the government was allowed to investigate, he had cut all ties with the world. His wife, May, was one of the missing. And his daughter, her body was never found. Eli had retreated to the old ranger station, deep within the Northern National Forest, a place he once called his sanctuary. Now, it was just a scar he refused to let heal. Day after day, he lived in repetition, checking bear traps, chopping firewood, sitting in silence by the generator, and recording the weather, a habit from his ranger days. He no longer trusted people. He especially didn't trust the government. Until the night he heard a knock. Wind howled through the trees. Rain lashed against the tin roof. The fireplace was down to glowing embers. And then, 1, 2, 3, 3 distinct knocks echoed through the freezing forest night. Eli gripped his hunting rifle. He wasn't expecting anyone. No one even knew he was still alive. He cracked open the door. Rifle raised. There was no one there. Only a dog, a German shepherd, soaked to the bone, jet black fur streaked with dried blood. It didn't bark, didn't whine. It just stared at him, like it had always known him. "Go away," Eli said, starting to close the door. But the dog didn't move. Its brown eyes pinned him in place. A shiver crawled down Eli's spine. He stared into its eyes, and in that moment, he felt something stir inside his mind. Not a thought, not a memory, but a feeling he hadn't touched in so long. Connection. He opened the door wider. "Come in," he whispered. The dog stepped inside, quiet as a shadow. Eli named him Shadow, because he made no sound, left no footprints, and never let Eli forget that he wasn't completely alone anymore. 3 days later, Eli began to notice strange things. Shadow wasn't just smart. He knew how to open the supply room door with his snout. He shut down the generator when the voltage surged. He stood by the front door exactly 30 seconds before a windstorm hit, like he could sense the weather. And on the 5th night, while Eli slept, he dreamed of May, standing in the forest, reaching out to him, and beside her was Shadow. Eli jolted awake. The dog was watching him, unblinking. "Just who the hell are you?" Eli murmured, and that was the moment he made a decision. To break his 13-year vow. To go back to Black Hollow. And uncover Shadow's past. The next morning, Eli woke earlier than usual. The northern wind howled through the wooden cracks of the ranger cabin. He stood still in front of the map table, staring south, toward where Black Hollow once pulsed like a beating heart in the forest. Now it was just a black mark, crossed out in ink. 13 years, he whispered, running a finger over the strike-through. Maybe it still hasn't erased what's left behind. He slung on his backpack, grabbed his old rifle, a canteen, and his compass. But before stepping outside, he turned to look at Shadow. "Coming?" he asked. No need to ask twice. The German shepherd stood up, walking beside him. No bark, no leash, just those amber-brown eyes, glimmering like they already knew where they were going. The path to Black Hollow wasn't on any GPS. Eli followed memory, old streams, long-forgotten summer campsites, but everything was now draped in moss, wild grass, and a strange, unsettling silence. At the third forest ridge, he saw it, a broken sign. No entry. Area restricted due to biohazard. The sign was rusted, barely standing, but behind it loomed something far more ominous. A 3-meter-high concrete wall stretches endlessly, topped with barbed wire, covered in moss. No footprints, no cameras, no guards. "They pulled out of here a long time ago," Eli muttered, "and left behind something they didn't want anyone to find." Shadow pressed his nose against a rusted section of the fence, then looked back at Eli. His eyes seemed to say, "Here." Eli stepped closer. At the base of the fence, hidden beneath dirt and broken branches, he saw it, A metal drainage hatch. Shadow scratched at it lightly. One of the bolts popped free, revealing a narrow tunnel leading beneath the wall. They didn't build this to escape, Eli murmured. They built it to let something out. He turned on his flashlight, wrapped a cloth around his mouth, and crawled in. Shadow followed silently behind. Inside was a pitch-black maze, old air ducts, abandoned maintenance corridors, cold concrete walls, cracks running like veins through the stone. Then came a sliver of light, filtering down from above. Eli realized they had reached the edge of Black Hollow. A dead town. Trees pierced through rooftops. Streets were blanketed in fallen leaves. No cars, no voices. Everything frozen, as if someone had once shouted, "Stop!" Eli passed a small medical outpost, its door wide open. Inside, scattered medical files littered the floor. On one of the folders, a red ink note, Case 12B. Subject responded to high-frequency brainwave patterns, displayed predictive imagery and emotional behavior. Eli's chest tightened. Shadow growled softly. He was standing in front of a small, pale blue house. Eli froze. It was his house. He stepped inside, like walking into a dream. Everything was dust-covered, but untouched. May's teacup still sat on the table. Their daughter's crayon drawing was crooked on the wall. And on the desk, a journal. Eli opened it. May's handwriting, shaky, rushed. "Eli, if you're reading this, then I might already be gone. I found out what they were doing. They were experimenting. On children. On animals. Shadow is not an ordinary dog. He can retain emotional memory. You must find him before they take him away." Eli stood frozen. "Shadow," he whispered. He turned to the dog. Shadow was staring at him, eyes unmoving, as if he knew everything. As if he had come back to bring Eli here. It wasn't Eli who found Shadow. Shadow chose Eli. Black Hollow felt like a town abandoned halfway through time. Everything stood still, ruined, but not yet decayed. Eli walked past rows of homes, his mind drifting in a haze between memory and the present. He had lived here. His wife had worked here. And now, Shadow, a dog that didn't remember who he was leading him backward through time. The road to the old research facility, Black Hollow Center for Biological and Neural Applications, was now a concrete husk, swallowed by the forest. The nameplate was gone. The glass doors were shattered. But Shadow stopped in front of a patch on the concrete wall, one where the moss rose higher than the rest. Eli stepped forward, brushed the moss aside, and found a small metal plaque embedded in the wall. "Emergency entry. Sublevel C laboratory access." He discovered an iron handle hidden beneath a layer of rock. With a hard pull, a ground hatch creaked open, revealing a rusted metal stairwell descending into thick, unlit darkness. "We're going down there?" Eli asked. Shadow didn't bark. He just turned his head, those eyes glowing like his own flashlight. Below was a labyrinth of underground corridors, air like ice, tinged with rust, damp, and something older than time itself. Flickering fluorescent bulbs, thick cobwebs, but every steel door was intact. Eli swept his flashlight across each label. Emotional response testing room 4 inches. Neural monitoring, animal subjects. Encrypted emotional data storage, KH-47. KH-47. Eli's heart clenched. May had mentioned that designation in her journal. And Shadow was test subject KH-47. The storage door opened easily. Inside was a round room lined with old screens, tangled cables, and rusted servers. But what made Eli freeze was the large glass chamber in the center. Drained dry, but still holding fragments of bone. Puppy bones. Not Shadow, but similar enough to steal his breath. Next to the tank was a brainwave monitor, wired to a dusty screen. And on the floor, paw prints, pressed deep into the concrete as if scorched into it. Shadow was here, Eli whispered. Shadow padded over to a metal cabinet and gently scratched it 3 times. Eli opened it. Inside, a small helmet-like device labeled Emotive Memory Activation Interface. He looked at Shadow. Want to try it? The dog stepped forward. No resistance. Eli carefully fitted the device on Shadow's head, then switched it on. A flicker of green light. The screen began to tremble. And then, Eli didn't see images. He felt them, like a flood of raw memory crashing through his chest. The sensation of fear, trapped in a dark room, with cold metal clanging on the floor. The warmth of a woman's embrace, the scent of lavender, May. The sting of a needle, the pain of being pulled away from his mother. And finally, the gaze of a little girl, arms wide open, cradling him with all her heart. Tears spilled from Eli's eyes. That was her, he whispered. Emily. He had never found his daughter's body after the disaster. The government said there was no DNA sample. But now, he understood. Emily had been here. And Shadow. Shadow was her dog. Eli wrapped his arms around Shadow. For the first time, truly believing, he hadn't been left behind. He had been guided home. It wasn't that Shadow had forgotten who he was. It was that he carried someone else's memories, to lead the hearts who were still lost, back to one another. When Eli emerged from the basement, he was no longer the man he had been for the past 13 years. The silent man who had shut the world out. He walked as if each step pressed against the ruins of his past. But this time, there was no fear. Outside, the rain had begun. Ash-gray skies draped the dead town like a blanket covering truths no one dared to touch. Shadow led the way again, this time down a narrow alley behind the old medical center. There, hidden among decaying homes, was one small house, still intact. Eli froze. This was the house where the child subjects had been kept. The ones chosen for special care during testing. The door was slightly ajar. Thick dust coated everything, but there were no signs of vandalism. Eli pushed it open. The hinges groaned, like the town was breathing out for the first time in years. The first room had a small bunk bed, a fabric wardrobe, and on the desk, a photograph. Eli stepped forward, hands trembling as he picked it up. Emily, his daughter, about 7 years old, was smiling as she cradled a black puppy, with white spots beneath its eyes. It was Shadow. Beneath the photo, in crayon-scrawled handwriting, "My Shadow, always with me." Eli pressed the photo to his chest. Shadow let out a soft whimper, then walked to a white painted door at the end of the hall. Scrawled across it in a child's shaky hand, "Don't go inside. Shadow gets sad." Eli hesitated. Then, he slowly placed his hand on the doorknob. Inside was a tiny bedroom, bathed in shades of violet, Emily's favorite color. But at the center of the room stood a large cylindrical device, like an MRI machine, but rigged with cables and glass tubes. On its side, cold technical lettering, Beta Link, Human-Animal Emotional Interface. Eli gasped for breath. This was where they had done the unthinkable. Linked a child's brain to an animal's, to store and transmit emotions as waveforms. On the console lay a notebook. Day 122 Subject MO7 shows high emotional resonance with KH47. Connection frequency peaks when the subject feels threatened. Shadow protects Emily, as if encoded into instinct. And the final line, written messily, almost desperately. "I'm no longer sure if this is an experiment, or a way for souls to avoid saying goodbye." Eli's hands clenched. Emily had been here. She hadn't died the way the reports claimed. She had been bonded to an emotional experiment with Shadow, creating something more than a pet, a keeper of memory. Eli turned to Shadow, who stood silently, watching him. There were tears glistening in the dog's eyes. Eli knelt down. "She's still in you, isn't she?" Shadow stepped closer and rested his head in Eli's lap. And Eli felt it, for the first time. The sensation of a child placing absolute trust in the arms of her father, even if only for a fleeting moment. He knew his daughter had never been afraid in the end. Shadow had kept his promise. Suddenly, an alarm blared from beneath the floor. Red lights began flashing. A synthetic voice echoed through the corridors. Intrusion detected. Perimeter lockdown protocol activated. Response team en route. Eli jumped to his feet. They've been watching this place all along. Shadow growled low. This time, it was Eli who took the lead. No hesitation. They dashed through the hallways, up the rusted stairwell, bursting into the forest, like tearing backward through time. Neither of them spoke, but in Eli's heart, one truth rang louder than the sirens behind them. If she still lives, somewhere, in Shadow's memory, then I will hold onto it, as if it were the last piece of myself. As Eli and Shadow emerged from the old laboratory, the sky cracked open and rain came pouring down. Cold drops stung his face, blurring his vision. But he didn't stop. The ranger in him remembered the path. An old dry creek bed winds back toward the ranger station, a trail only he and Shadow had ever known. Behind them, the first sound broke the silence. A branch snapping. Then, gravel crunching beneath tires. And finally, the distant, growing thrum of helicopter blades. Eli pulled up his hood. Shadow ran close, ears alert, body tense like a coiled spring. "They're here," Eli muttered. Out of the fog-laced forest, 3 dark figures appeared. Black uniforms, weapons raised. Not police, not military. Recovery team, trained to clean up the remnants of failed experiments. No warnings, no words. They opened fire. Gunshots ripped through the trees. Eli and Shadow dove into a trench. Dodging the first volley, he pressed his back against a rotting log, heartbeat thundering. Shadow didn't bark, but his eyes had changed. From warm brown to a cold, glowing yellow. "No, Shadow," Eli whispered, gripping his neck. "You can't kill anyone." Shadow froze, then turned to him, eyes asking, "What do we do when they try to kill us first?" Eli fumbled in his gear, pulling out 2 flares and a shard of mirror. Back in his rescue days, he had learned light and reflection could create illusions. He angled the mirror, lit the flares. Red sparks burst, flickering wildly, projecting the silhouette of a man running in the opposite direction. The recovery team took the bait. They split off, veering left. Eli shouted, "Now!" Shadow sprang from the right. Not to attack, but to distract. He let out a growl. Not of this world. A sound that shattered silence like glass. One of the agents collapsed, clutching his head, screaming, "What's in my mind?" The other 2 fired wildly, but hit nothing. Shadow was already gone. Eli seized the moment, flanked them from the other side, tackled one, ripped the transmitter from his vest. He yanked out the battery and threw it into the creek. The last agent turned, gun raised, aiming for Eli, but a black shadow lunged from behind. Shadow. He didn't bite. He didn't kill. He slammed the man face first to the ground, placed a firm paw on his back, and growled into the nape of his neck, low. Warning. Primal. The man passed out. Silence returned. The rain began to ease. The forest wind brushed through the treetops. Like a long exhale, Eli collapsed onto the wet ground, gasping for air. Shadow sat beside him, resting his head against Eli's shoulder. "We can't go back to the station," Eli whispered. "They'll return. And next time, it won't just be 3. He looked up at the canopy. Nightfall was coming fast. To the north, a ridge of jagged stone. Beyond it, an abandoned military outpost from the Cold War. No one lived there, but it had power. Steel doors, generators. Eli rose to his feet. "We need to send a signal. Not for help." He looked at Shadow, but to tell the truth. Shadow walked beside him, no longer just a companion, but a keeper of memory. Inside him now lived The sorrow of a child torn from her parents. The love of a woman who once dared to hope. And the unbroken will of a man who thought he had died from the inside out. Now they were one. They reached the old outpost just before dawn. Hidden deep within a forgotten valley, Echo 9 had once served as a Cold War surveillance site, equipped with an underground broadcast system designed to pierce through terrain, jamming frequencies, and even hostile airwaves. Eli exhaled when he saw it still standing, a cold block of concrete, weathered, but solid as a lone fortress. Shadow paused by the rusted iron gate, sniffing around as if recognizing something long buried. Eli pushed the door open, its hinges screeching through the mist like a blade cutting through memory itself. Inside, everything was covered in dust. But the machines remained, as if time had only paused, not yet forgotten. Eli found the main control panel, flipped the switch on the backup generator. A soft click, then a subtle tremor passed through the floor. Indicator lights blinked. A message lit up on the black screen. System ready. Awaiting transmission. Eli sat down. He pulled out May's journal, Emily's photograph, and finally, the small pendant from around his neck. His wife's old government ID tag. One last time, he whispered. Then he pressed record. My name is Eli Ward. I was once a forest ranger in Black Hollow. My wife, May, was a neuroscientist on Project Moonlink. She didn't die in the accident. She was silenced by the same people who created Shadow. My daughter, Emily, was one of their subjects. But her memory still lives. He took a breath. His hand trembled. Shadow is not a weapon. He is a witness, a guardian of emotions they tried to erase. And if you come looking for him, hear this. He no longer belongs to any of you. Eli sent the signal. Somehow, he knew someone would hear it, and if not, then at least, he had spoken on behalf of the forgotten. Just then, Shadow growled softly, not out of warning, but of activation. His eyes shifted, this time to a deep, glowing blue. A faint wave of light pulsed outward, sweeping across the room like an invisible tide. The monitors blinked. Then, the impossible happened. Emotion data began to form images, not from the computers, but from Shadow himself. Within the pale blue glow, Emily appeared, running through the forest, calling out for her father, laughing with her mother, holding Shadow close. Eli collapsed to his knees. You're still here, he whispered. Shadow stepped forward. He pressed his forehead into Eli's palm. And in that instant, everything surged into Eli's mind. The wonder of a child. The love of a woman who never gave up. The crushing loneliness that had haunted their empty home for 13 years. There were no more distances. No more clocks. No more silence. Only connection. Pure, ancient, wordless. Suddenly, from beyond the valley, a red flare shot into the sky. They had been found. Eli stood up, but this time, his eyes were calm, resolved. We don't run anymore, he said to Shadow. This time, we protect the truth. A red flare soared into the sky and exploded into the mist. A silent declaration of war. Eli and Shadow stood at the heart of the abandoned outpost, watching the light tear through the night. They knew, those who once tried to seize Shadow, we were coming back, to erase him forever, not because he was dangerous, but because he held a truth the world was never meant to remember. The sound of helicopters rumbled in the distance. Treaded vehicles crushed stone. Eli adjusted his old rifle, not to fight, but to distract. Shadow stood motionless beside him, but his glowing blue eyes pulsed like a heartbeat. As the strike team approached, Eli had already taken position atop a rocky ledge. He saw them, uniformed in black, faces blank, nameless. They carried electric rifles, signal blockers, and a device that looked disturbingly like a mobile memory eraser. One of them said, "Retrieve subject KH-47. Purge all data, no trace." Inside the outpost, Shadow stepped up to the control panel. He placed his forehead against the neural interface, a system originally built for humans. But now, it accepted shadow. A wave of light surged outward. Images began to play, not from Shadow's memories, but from those once bonded to him. Emily, May, Eli, and nameless children, lost in forgotten trials. The system, reactivated by Eli's repair, broadcasted all through the old Cold War transmitters. A message made of pure emotion. No language, no sound, but everyone who saw it understood. This was what humanity tried to forget, and what it must never forget again. The strike team broke through the doors. But then, something strange happened. Lights flickered violently. Devices malfunctioned. Some dropped their weapons, collapsed to the floor, crying, as if they'd just seen their own childhoods. A moment lost, a love torn away. What's happening? The commander barked. Eli stepped forward from the shadows above. You created a machine to store memory. But what you never understood is that emotion can't be contained? He looked to Shadow, now standing tall, his body softly glowing with that same quiet blue light. Not a mutation, not a weapon, but a harmony, of species, of memory, of pain and healing. The commander shouted, "Open fire!" But no one moved. One soldier whispered, I saw my mother in that light. She died when I was 8. Another sobbed, I saw my daughter. She used to hold a dog. Just like that. The entire team stood still. Not paralyzed, not stunned, awakened, by the very thing they were trained to destroy. One by one, they lowered their weapons, dropped their gear, and walked away. Eli stepped into the control room. Shadow turned from the console. His light is fading. You did it, Eli whispered. Shadow no longer glowed, but in his eyes, there was a sky full of memory. Eli knelt down, pressed his forehead to Shadow's. Thank you, for keeping her alive in me. Days later, the government went silent on Black Hollow. No explanations, no reports, but a video, untraceable, appeared online. Footage of the outpost's light. Memory sequences. Eli's voice, telling the whole story, not with anger, but with sorrow and hope. It spread like wildfire. People called it the dog who remembered. Eli and Shadow returned to the forest, no longer hiding, but not needing to be found. They lived quietly. Each day, Eli wrote down the memories Shadow brought back to him. Eventually, a book was born, The Memory Keeper: How a Dog Taught Me to Love Again. In the spring of the 3rd year, Shadow passed, not from age, not from illness, but because his purpose was complete. Eli buried him beneath the tree, where Emily once played as a child. On the stone, he carved only, "My last friend, the one who remembered all I had lost." That day, in the quiet forest, a soft wind passed through the trees, and Eli swore he could hear his daughter's laughter, somewhere behind the leaves. Not all experiments create monsters. Some, by accident, create what humanity has long forgotten. A loyal heart, a memory that doesn't betray, and a love that needs no training. So if you ever meet a dog whose eyes seem to hold an entire sky of memories, pause, because maybe it's not just looking at you. Maybe it's remembering for you the things you once forgot.